Greetings everybody, Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode we talked about the Scepter of Sargeras. It was the third of the great artifacts mentioned, fourth if you count the Skull of Gul'dan. So the Horde got the Skull of Gul'dan, they found the Book of Medivh in Alterac, and they got the Eye of Dalaran from Dalaran, and the only thing left in the book is to get the Scepter of Sargeras, which can open up portals from the Tomb of Sargeras. In the game, they do Scepter, then Eye, then Book of Medivh. So either way, once we finish this, we'll be able to kind of go through that process in the Let's Plays. But stay a while and listen to Chapter 12 of Beyond the Dark Portal. Fenris stared up at the clearly old edifice, confused. He had not been sure what to expect from the Tomb of Sargeras, but it was not this. What he had at first thought were carvings were in fact the shells and bones and spines of various sea creatures attached to the building's outer walls from years of submersion. It was like seeing the bottom of a deep ocean, only raised up onto land and fashioned into a habitable structure. And the door to this odd building hung wide open. "This is where that artifact awaits?" Fenris asked, frowning. He was having a hard time reconciling this place's lumpy appearance with the earth-shattering item Ner'zhul had said would be here. The Death Knight had no such doubts, however. "It is here," Ragnarok insisted. "I can sense it deep inside." "Then let's go," Tagar shouted. "Why are we standing around? The sooner we go in, the sooner we come back out." Fenris often found himself at odds with the Bone Chewer chieftain, but he was right on that count. Fenris was anxious to be done with this job of courier. He signaled to his orcs, and they followed Ragnarok, Tagar, and Tagar's Bone Chewer warriors inside. Everywhere he looked, he saw signs that the building had spent hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years underwater. Yeah, and it's been, I think, probably about 10,000 years. Edges and corners were rounded both from constant friction with the water and from moss and coral and shells that had attached themselves there. The floor was covered with mold and seaweed. Any decorations along the wall were either destroyed by all those years in the water, or covered by just as many years of accumulation. Here and there some water had remained pooled and was now long since stagnant. No light penetrated here. The strange building had no windows, but that was not a concern. Ragnarok raised his hand and a burst of yellowish illumination appeared above him. It cast disturbing shadows about the corridor, but at least allowed them to move steadily inward. As they progressed deeper, Fenris noticed that the walls here were cleaner than they had been near the entrance, and not just less grimy, but less degraded. The carvings that decorated every surface had not been worn away to the same degree, and he caught glimpses here and there of what this temple must have been at its height. It would have been magnificent, filled with a beauty and an elegance he had never even imagined possible, and Fenris felt rough and bestial treading its halls. He could see that the rest of his clan felt the same way. Tagar and his Bone Chewer orcs seemed unaffected by the temple's beauty, but then they seemed to have little appreciation for anything beyond death and destruction. Ragnarok appeared utterly focused on the task at hand. Which might have been why it was Tagar who suddenly stopped and pointed at a spot on the wall near where it met the floor. "Look there," the Bone Chewer chieftain said. Fenris followed his gesture and saw a smear of something dark across the carvings. It looked like blood, Tagar confirmed. He knelt by the smear, sniffed at it, and touched his tongue to it. "Orc blood," he clarified, rising to his feet again. "Several years old." "Likely the blood of Gul'dan or his warlocks," Ragnarok said. "We're getting close." It was not a pleasant thought, even if it did mean that the end of their quest was at hand. "Be on guard," Fenris said to his orcs as they nodded somberly. "Are you scared, Fenris?" Tagar mocked, stepping up and shoving his face close to Fenris's. "Afraid of what we might find?" "Of course I am, you idiot," Fenris snapped, his tusks scraping the younger chieftain's cheeks. "Gul'dan was a traitor and a fool, but he was still the most powerful warlock the Horde has ever seen, and something in here killed him and all his followers. You'd have to be insane or stupid not to be afraid." "Well, I'm not afraid," Tagar replied, drawing smiles and laughs from several of Fenris's warriors. Fenris himself just shook his head and wondered yet again why he'd been sent with such an idiot. But that's why, he answered himself, because someone has to be smart enough to know what to do and when, and someone else has to be foolish enough to go on anyway, even when it's near suicide. Fine, Fenris said, allowing himself a small grin. You go first, then. Tagar smiled and whooped, his war cry echoing down the hall. He strode forward, leading the way without a moment's concern. The others followed. The condition of the walls and floor continued to improve as they descended farther into the temple. Its glory was breathtaking. At one intersection of corridors, Ragnarok stopped, apparently confused. He turned first one way and then the other. Fenris frowned. What's wrong? Nothing. The Death Knight hesitated again, then nodded to himself and strode firmly down one of the halls. Fenris shook his head, but followed. The hallway ended in a wide room. The walls here were blank, surprisingly enough, clean and smooth and bare, and the sudden contrast made the room seem stark and dignified. At the far end, a massive vault door of plain black iron filled most of the wall. This is it, Ragnarok breathed. He swung the door open and froze in utter terror. Beyond the door lay an almost impenetrable darkness, as if night had been condensed and hidden here, where the light would never find it. Standing in that darkness just past the doorway was a creature from a nightmare. Diablo. It towered over them, standing so tall it was forced to hunch within the room beyond. Its skin was scaled and covered in bumps that seemed to ripple, as if somehow its surface were fluid, like water. Spikes jutted from the shoulders, the forearms, the chest, and various other places. The overlong arms ended in huge hands with long claws. The face was too narrow at the bottom and too wide at the top, with slanting eyes that glowed a smoky, roiling yellow and a tiny mouth somehow filled with an insane number of razor-sharp teeth. A long tail whipped about behind it. In one of its clawed hands it held a long rod, almost a spear, with a wooden haft and worked silver ends. The top was a mass of spikes clustered around a large gem that glowed with a brilliant white light of its own, and it was that radiance that held the darkness in the tomb partially at bay. Small flickers of lightning burst from the gem as well, only to fade into the darkness again. Oh, it's that time of year again. The Scepter of Sargeras, the artifact Ner'zhul had sent them to retrieve. All they had to do was take it from what Fenris was absolutely sure was a demon. You will not pass, the creature hissed, its voice rolling over them in oily waves. This tomb has already been defiled by mortals once. It shall not happen again. We don't want to pass, Fenris replied, biting back the fear and bile that leaped up in his throat. We just want that scepter you're waving about. The demon laughed, a low chuckle like bone grating on bone, and stepped forward, its long clawed feet digging deep furrows into the marble floor. Then you may try to take it from me, it offered, and after you fail, I will shred your bodies and sup upon your souls. I'll crack your bones with my teeth and drink out the marrow, Tagar bellowed back at the demon. This was the kind of language he understood. Then he charged, his axe held high. And though he cursed Tagar for a fool and himself for a worse one, Fenris raised his own weapon and leaped into the fray beside his fellow chieftain. The other 30 or so Bone Lord and Bone Chewer warriors were right behind them. Even so, it was a difficult battle. The demon was strong, stronger than any one of them by far, and faster as well. Its long claws cleft skin and bone and muscle with ease, tearing through the orcs as if they were dried leaves. The scepter it held was heavy enough to crush an orc's skull without taking a dent. Even the demon's tail was a weapon. Tagar shrieked in outrage as the creature struck one of the bone chewers with it. The long barb at the end went easily through the hapless orc's chest and emerged, dripping blood from its back. But the worst, the most frightening attack it possessed was its bite. That unbelievable mouth stretched wider than should have physically been possible, exposing row upon row of teeth. Fenris watched the demon bite off half a warrior's head, and even through his own battle rage, he felt sick. It was that battle rage that saved them. Under normal circumstances, Fenris disapproved of the bloodlust, but now it was a boon. Without it, many of the orcs, including himself, would have run away in abject terror. But with their heads pounding and their vision blurring and their blood humming, they attacked and continued to attack. Yes, the demon was faster, but so many warriors attacking on each new assault, a few hits got through. The demon was stronger, but severing its limbs still crippled it. At the last, with the demon's tail and one arm and part of a leg gone, the other arm so shattered it writhed like a snake, Fenris and Tagar struck as one, their axes slicing into its thick neck. The blows came from opposite sides, delivering with all the force their respective masters could muster, and both chieftains took thin cuts along their fingers where the other's blade had nicked. But the demon toppled to the ground, his neck cut clean through from both sides, the head landing at Ragnar's feet. Fenris bent down and picked up the scepter. It was lighter than he had expected, but he could feel a faint thrum of power through it. "We have what we were sent for," he said, turning back. "Let's go." Oh, that was Fenris. "What?" Surprisingly, it was Ragnar who protested. "But this is the tomb of Sargeras, and you just killed its guardian." "That was one guardian," Fenris replied. "There will be others, you mark my words." He held the scepter up so it caught the light. "Fortunately, we don't have to go any deeper into this pit." "You don't understand," Ragnar continued. He stepped up closer to Fenris. "We got the scepter. We should get the eye of Sargeras as well. Do you remember when I was confused earlier? It was because I was sensing both artifacts. It took me a moment to realize what was going on, but I know exactly where the eye of Sargeras is now. Down that other corridor. That was the artifact Gul'dan sought, and now it's within our grasp." Uh-oh. Ragnar's glowing eyes narrowed in fury. "Pitiful things. I could destroy you with a mere thought. You will come with me to retrieve the eye, or what?" Fenris spat. "Go ahead. Kill us where we stand and go back alone for the eye. Either way, we will be dead." He was mostly sure that the Death Knight was bluffing, but he stood by his decision. Ragnar might kill them in a fit of anger, but whatever was sure to be guarding the eye would most definitely kill them. Ragnar lifted his hands, and for a moment, Fenris's heart stopped, but then the Death Knight sagged. He had been bluffing after all. "You are fools," Ragnar growled, but his voice was laced with defeat. "Maybe," Fenris agreed, "but we are fools who will live to see another day." Without another word, he turned. His clan followed him, as did Tagar and his orcs. It was only with the smallest satisfaction that a few moments later he noticed that Ragnar had again joined them. "Do you have it?" Fenris dismounted, sliding off the dragon's back and planting both feet solidly on the cracked ground, then met Gorfin's stare as the Death Knight hurried toward them. The dragons had been waiting for the orcs when their boats had reached land again, and had quickly carried them back into the blasted lands to rejoin Gorfin and the others. "Yes, we have it," Fenris confirmed, holding up the long, cloth-wrapped scepter. He handed it to Gorfin, happy to be rid of it. "What now?" "Now we make haste back through the portal," Gorfin answered. Fenris suppressed a shudder as Gorfin's hands closed about the bundle protectively. "Our tasks here are finished. Azeroth is no longer important to us. We leave this world to the humans and their allies, and good riddance." Fenris started to ask for more detail, but a loud rumbling stopped him. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw several large carts rolling into the valley, orcs guiding each one. Remembering the discussion back in the Blackrock Mountains, he realized those must have contained the cargo Deathwing had asked them to allow through the portal. He wondered idly what could be so important that the Black Dragon wanted it moved to another world, but resigned himself to likely never knowing. Another orc, though, was more curious than Fenris. He started to approach one of the carts. Before Fenris could even draw breath to shout out a warning, a dark shape swooped from the skies. The orc screamed and dropped to the ground, clutching at his face. Blood dripped from between his fingers. "Get back!" Fenris cried. "Stay away from the carts!" The dragons that had borne the orcs here now took to the skies to defend the cargo, some of them not waiting to make sure their riders had completely dismounted. "Gorfind!" came a voice Fenris recognized. That scream could belong to no one other than the Warsong chieftain. Grom Hellscream had clearly been with the forces harassing the Alliance troops at Netherguard Keep and had just returned with them. He was still halfway across the valley, but they heard him clearly.
"Did you bring these creatures?"
"I did," Gorfine replied, not raising his voice, but his words carrying nonetheless. "The Black Dragons are our new allies." Grom ducked as a black dragon's claws slid by dangerously close to his head and scowled.
"Some allies," he shouted. "Do something about your winged friends before they cause a panic or kill us all."
The Death Knight glanced up at the dragon, studying them a moment. Then he nodded. "Deathwing," he called, "I swear to you that I will defend those carts and their cargo. Please pull your dragons back to the valley's edge." Fenris couldn't pick the dragon elder out among all the shifting, gliding shapes, but a moment later the dragons wheeled and made for perches along the cliffs ringing the valley floor.
"Better,"
Grom grunted, approaching them. He nodded at Fenris, who nodded back. The two of them had always gotten along. Fenris considered Grom one of the finest chieftains in the Horde and a superb warrior as well.
"Did you get what you needed?"
Grom asked them both. "We did," Gorfine replied. He didn't say anything further. Grom peered at the carts.
"What are those?"
Grom asked. "Cargo," Gorfine replied shortly. Each cart was made of sturdy wood beams, had high sides, and was completely covered with a thick tarp. Fenris could see from the way the tarp shifted that the carts were full, but could discern nothing more.
"I thought all we had to retrieve are those artifacts,"
Grom said. "There has been a change of plans," the Death Knight answered. "Nothing to worry about." He raised his voice and must have worked some magic as well, because suddenly it echoed across the valley. "Those carts are under my personal protection, and anyone who interferes with them or tries to look in them will answer to me." Several orcs glanced up startled, and two who had been approaching the rear cart hastily backed away. Fenris shrugged. His task was done, and if Gorfine wanted to play some other game, that was between him and Ner'zhul.
"How soon can we go through?"
Yeah, he asked instead. "I need some of your clan to stay behind and defend the portal for a short time longer. You and the rest can go through now if you like," Gorfine answered. "Tagar, you too. I need some of your bone chewers." Fenris frowned but nodded. He had hoped all his clan would be allowed to return, but he understood Gorfine's reasoning.
"What of us?"
Grom was asking Gorfine, but Fenris turned away. The Warsong's orders were not his concern right now. Instead, he signaled his second, Malgrim's Stormhand, and together they selected 12 orcs to stay behind under Malgrim's command. The orcs did not protest. They were Thunderlords. They served the Horde as he asked.
"To the portal!"
The rest of the Thunderlord clan marched across the valley floor and approached the towering new dark portal. Just ahead of them were the covered carts, and Fenris saw several Death Knights detach themselves from the forces positioned around the valley and step up beside those mysterious vehicles. Gorfine was there as well, near the front. Fenris heard Tagar yelling at his bone chewers, trying to divvy them up, and the roars of ogres as they were promised combat. "Me smash!" one of them cried gleefully. The entire Warsong clan, too, would stay, judging from the comments he heard. The portal would be amply protected. Part of him thought he should remain as well, but another part of him was deeply weary and longed for home. Later, perhaps he would return with fresh orcs to relieve those he had stationed here. Fenris hastened up the ramp and faced the dark portal itself. The portal still made him nervous, with its strange rippling energy. It disturbed him that something so small, he could easily walk around the portal, it wasn't even as wide as the thick stone columns framing it, could form a bridge between two separate worlds. He kept half expecting the portal to fail somehow, to collapse and tear apart anyone caught within it. The thought made him pick up his pace, and he ran through it, feeling the strange jarring sensation he'd noticed when he'd left Draenor, as if his body were being shunted a great distance. A cold prickle ran across his skin, and a brief flash crossed his eyes. Then he was staring at the familiar red skies of Draenor again. Fenris breathed a sigh of relief and continued on away from the portal, stopping finally to allow the rest of his clan to catch up. Behind him, he saw some of the other clans filing through as well, and Gorfine had already departed with those carts. Fenris had done his order, and now he would simply wait until Ner'zhul had new instructions for him. Until then, the Thunderlord warriors would return to their home. He had had enough of intrigue and deception and plotting to last him a long, long time. All right, so we've basically caught up to the entire Horde campaign. The final Horde mission is to take the artifacts and bring them back through the portal. Well, they've just done that. So there might be a little bit of like post content, like the ending game video for this or something that really requires a little bit more lore, but we can do almost all of the rest of the Horde Let's Plays, if not all of them. All right, we got this episode in the pipe, 5x5. Thanks everybody for listening. I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.